I'm Jim Paxon. We have a special show for you today, from Mexican wolves to native fish and even the magnificent pronghorn. You'll see what's being done to help these species survive. All of that and more next on Arizona Wildlife Views.
Arizona Wildlife Views is brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects made possible by the Sport Fish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Welcome to Arizona Wildlife Views. We begin our show today in the rugged pine forest of northeastern Arizona, where game and fish biologists are working to ensure the survival of a very unique and endangered predator, the Mexican wolf.
Alison Greenleaf and Jeff Dolphin are very skilled trappers. They are also biologists with Arizona Game and Fish, and they're hoping to catch an endangered species, the Mexican gray wolf.
This specific area right here, they've been food caching these guys like all summer long, but wolves, when they've been coming into a spot consistently, they'll have like their own trails coming into it, but we're able to watch them on trail camera too. So certain rocks and logs that they always kind of come and sniff, and they might urinate near or scent mark or something. Those are good spots to set. And if you just put a different scent right there, then they'll go and check it out. So you just got to make sure everything's set up right.
The wolf's food cache consists mainly of roadkill elk that the biologists have collected and then placed in an area close to their den.
All trappers are differently. Some trappers make it look like a M80 bomb went off. It looks very obvious that there's something there, but they catch wolves as well. But, you know, everybody's different. I got trained to try and disguise it as much as possible. So that's kind of how I do it.
In March 1998, as part of the Mexican Wolf Recovery Program, 11 captive-raised wolves were released into historical wolf habitat in eastern Arizona and western New Mexico. Additional releases have taken place since then. With the birth of the first wild-born litter from a wild-born parent in 2002, the Mexican Wolf Reintroduction Project entered into a new phase. Natural reproduction began to replace reintroductions from captive populations. Arizona Game and Fish continues to work with its federal partners to monitor and sustain these wolves. Today, they're hoping to catch a few of this year's pups from the Blue Stem pack. It is currently one of 12 packs totaling 44 collared Mexican gray wolves and 4 single wolves living throughout the recovery area. The main goal is to put a GPS collar on a young wolf and take blood samples to keep track of the genetics of the pack. The alpha male from this pack was found dead, so the biologists want to know if he was able to father these pups before he died, or has a new alpha male bred with the female.
There's so many reasons why we need to collar and capture and handle them to answer all these questions. This population only came from like 7 individuals, and so just to manage the genetics and keep the genetic integrity within the wild population, we have to be kind of heavy-handed. With the amount of illegal killings and unnatural losses that we have too, we need to be able to keep really good track of the wolves and look for other factors why, you know, we have low pup survival.
The traps are padded, as Jeff demonstrates, so they won't harm the wolves. Once all the traps are set, the biologists retreat to their nearby camp and wait. They know when the pack comes out to feed at night is their best chance of trapping success. Each trap is rigged with an alarm that sends a signal back to camp when it's deployed. That way Jeff and Alison make sure the animal is in the trap for the shortest time possible. Tonight, from the time the pup was snared until he was removed from the trap, was less than 10 minutes.
The first thing you want to do is just check him out, make sure he's breathing and he looks okay. Nothing traumatic on the paw that he got trapped on. You'd attend to that probably first if there was. And then the main thing you want to do is get the collar. That's our main focus. If he gets away, at least he has a collar and we can get him back. The second most important thing is to get his blood, because we need to check genetics, which is pretty important right now. And then we want to get the vaccines into him, and we just give him the regular kind of puppy vaccines that your domestic dog would get as well, because we do have parvo and distemper that are out here, and rabies.
Once his eyes and muzzle are covered, the pup becomes very docile, so there's no need to tranquilize him. All of the wolves in Arizona are given identification numbers. This young male is M1275.
He's about 4 months old, 27 pounds. He looked great.
6.3 centimeters length.
His coat looked really good. He had good weight on him for that age. We gave him a score of a 3, and the highest you can get is a 5, which we hardly ever give to any of these guys. A nice looking wolf is usually a 3, and that's what we put him at. So.
Since M1275 is still growing, his collar is lined with foam that will wear away over time, allowing the collar to expand with him. It takes less than an hour for the biologists to complete their work, and then the young wolf is ready to be released so he can rejoin his pack.
I've always wanted to, I just never really ever deviated from it. When I was a little kid, when you do it enough, you're on enough trap lines, and you know, if you're out there, you're on like day 22, or you know, you're out there for a month and you haven't caught anything yet, it's really discouraging. But I mean, we gather information all summer long leading up to this, you know, and that's kind of what trapping involves, is just you get all your best information, and then when the first week of August hits, then you know, you apply all that and try and go out and get everything collared that you can.
The information these biologists gather will go a long way in determining if this species can successfully be recovered in Arizona. The Mexican wolf is an endangered species rarity. Its major recovery needs are not habitat management and restoration. Rather, reintroduced wolves show very clearly what is needed to achieve recovery, which is primarily education and tolerance. It takes a special kind of person to dedicate the time and resources required to help recover these animals. For both Jeff and Alison, this is more of a calling than a job.
I've always wanted to, I just never really ever deviated from it. They'd have ambassador wolves, the Division of Wildlife in the 80s would come to the schools and stuff, and I always thought that was really cool. And then I can't remember the age I was, but it was, you know, you reach the realization like, hey, we don't have like grizzly bears up in the Rockies or wolves in the Rockies, and then you were like, well, what happened to them?
I think, you know, the wolves are recovered in various places around the country, and here it just hasn't happened yet. So I wanted to come back after doing, you know, various other projects and things like that. When this job opened up, I thought it would be a worthwhile endeavor to try and give it a shot, you know, and work with these awesome people and see if we can make a difference. And I feel like we are. I feel like it's like the population's slowly starting to creep up there. So it's starting to look a little more promising.
And so here's the toxin that we've diluted.
Matt O'Neill is preparing to inject his patient with Botox. Now, O'Neill is not a medical professional. He's a biologist, and his patient is a fish.
Although the fish do look a little bit younger at times, that is not our goal.
The goal is to help hatchery-raised endangered native fish survive in the wild by teaching them to avoid predators. The Botox is part of an experimental research project taking place at the Arizona Game and Fish Department's Bubbling Ponds Native Fish Conservation Facility. O'Neill runs the research center, which is near Oak Creek in Cornville, Arizona.
And we are tasked with helping with native fish conservation. So we maintain refuge populations of several endangered species, several endangered fishes. Oh yeah, lots of fish.
Refuge populations are sort of like savings accounts.
So the cage holds our refuge populations, and all these fish are the ones that we hold against the catastrophic loss in the wild.
They protect Arizona's biodiversity against future losses caused by natural disaster, disease, or devastation by predators. In other words, they prevent endangered fish populations from being wiped out completely.
So for example, the spike dace that we have here, so they used to exist across much of the Verde River Basin and the Gila River Basin. Now they're down to 3 isolated populations. And so it doesn't take much of a wildfire to flood those areas with ash and kill every fish in that population. So one good wildfire could easily wipe out a third of the spike dace populations that exist in the world.
Knowing the status of Arizona's fish populations is the first step in any conservation effort.
So very silvery, big eyes.
It's very important that we know exactly what fish we have and exactly where they are. Accurate fish surveys are, of course, critically important. So you guys will be the people who are providing the basic information that allow us to manage all the fish in the state.
From time to time, O'Neill teaches game and fish interns and others who will be collecting fish population data how to identify the various species they'll encounter in the wild.
When you look at gross morphology, what you're really looking at is lots of different key traits that help you identify a fish. So color sucks. Color is probably the worst trait that you can look at to identify a fish. So do you know how to count fin rays?
No. That might be a red shiner.
That's a good guess. Not right. That's a good guess.
Is it chub?
Yes. There is no question that it does not go past the edge of the eye. You can tell a little bit by the tail. You can definitely separate the channel from the bullhead and the flathead by the tail.
After a couple of hours learning to identify fish, some students take the plunge into a research pond that's filled with a variety of species to see how many they can recognize underwater.
When you go in the pond, we'll ask you to identify all the species present, and we will ask you to group the fish by size class, so 0 to 100 millimeters, 100 to 200, and 200 plus millimeters.
Snorkel surveys are harder than they look. But then again, managing native fish populations is harder than you can imagine.
No, we certainly have not figured it all out.
All too often, hatchery-raised native fish don't survive after they're released into the wild. Take, for instance, the endangered razorback sucker.
So these are the Bubbling Ponds Fish Hatchery razorback ponds. And over here on the plank, Frank is feeding these fish right now. And so that facility is contracted with the Bureau of Reclamation to produce 12,000 razorbacks of a certain size every year. And many of those fish, or if not all of those fish, go into the lower Colorado River system. So they're tagged, they're marked so that we can identify them when they're recaptured.
But few of them survive.
And so we're working with the lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program to identify ways to improve the stocking success of razorback suckers and bonytail.
There are many reasons why fish raised in an artificial environment don't do well in the wild. For instance, they're not used to foraging because they're fed on a regular basis. And they may lack the swimming stamina needed to thrive in a flowing river because the water they're raised in is still. Bubbling Ponds researchers are working on those issues, and they're also seeking a solution to predators, by far the greatest threat of all to hatchery-raised native fish.
And so again, these fish are coming from a bucket. The only other fish they've ever seen has been their own species. And so they go into the wild incredibly naive. And when we talk about naive, we actually mean that if you were to put a bunch of untrained bonytail into a tank and you add a bass to that tank, the bonytail will immediately swim to that bass and use it as cover. So it certainly seems that our hatchery fish do not understand what a predator is. And the likelihood of them surviving their first encounter with a predator is very low when they're swimming and using that predator as cover. I think a recent Bureau of Reclamation report suggested that about 90% of the mortality for the hatchery-raised stocks is due to predators, due to the flathead catfish and due to striped bass.
Bass and catfish are non-native fish. They didn't exist in Arizona until European settlers brought them here, and now they're a constant threat to native fish like bonytail. Which brings us back to Botox.
So that's the botulinum toxin.
O'Neill is using it to teach these bonytail to recognize and run from predators.
And so we put this on a centrifuge and spin it down to get the liquid all to the bottom.
Just as he prepares to demonstrate the process, he gets a call from the hatchery, where another type of predator is threatening the razorback suckers. This one's of the feathered variety, and it's about to meet its match. Radio-controlled airplanes. They're the not-so-secret weapons O'Neill and research tech Josh Walters are using to deal with bothersome birds that prey on their precious fish.
So we quite simply take the aircraft off the ground or throw it into the air and chase the birds off the property. Whereas one of the other techniques that we use are shotgun shells and crackers that disrupt all the animals at the hatchery, and including all the visitors as well. The aircraft really do give the birds a fright, but what's great is that, something's up. We can very specifically target a single bird so that we can chase a cormorant off the property while not scaring any of the other ducks and the other waterfowl and other birds that live here.
O'Neill and Walters are earning a reputation for finding creative ways to get the job done. Sometimes their methods take the game and fish purchasing people by surprise, like the request to buy Botox.
It certainly took a lot of explaining, yes.
But in the end, they were sold on the science. Botox is merely a new twist on a decades-old method of training fish to recognize predators.
The most simple way would be to throw a bunch of prey species, a bunch of bonytail or a bunch of razorbacks, into a tank with a predator, let the predator eat a few of those fish, and then the rest of those fish would be considered trained.
Trained to avoid predators because the prey fish have a chemical in their skin, an alarm pheromone that warns the other fish of danger.
A fish gets eaten, the pheromone is released into the water, and other fish sense that pheromone and say, something over there is dangerous, recognize that and don't go near it again.
In a small tub like this, all of the prey fish actually see the attack on their peers. But O'Neill wants to expand this research to larger ponds where not all of the prey fish will benefit from that visual cue. So he altered the experiment to include a blender and Botox. It starts by removing a bass from an anesthetic solution that temporarily paralyzes it. Then O'Neill injects the fish's jaw muscles with Botox.
So we're using botulinum toxin, a less refined version of Botox treatments in humans, to paralyze the muscles that allow those bass to open their mouths fast enough to capture prey.
After the procedure, the bass won't realize its ability to hunt is hindered. It'll act normally, chasing bonytail even though it can't eat them. Of course, the alarm pheromone is missing, so O'Neill will have to add that to the water himself. Using bonytail that are raised for science and are not genetically appropriate for stocking, O'Neill makes a powerful potion of alarm juice in the lab.
All right, here is the skin off of 3 bonytail. Add some tank water.
It's a solution of bonytail skin harvested from euthanized fish.
Add the fish skin.
And liquefied in a blender.
Now we have a nice gray homogenized fish skin solution.
The concentrated cocktail of alarm pheromone goes into the bucket with the hindered bass.
Let's go train some bonytail.
Then it all goes into the pond with 20 bonytail. They immediately sense the pheromone and associate the bass with danger, and not one bonytail gets eaten in the process. This will be critically important when O'Neill starts training hundreds of big fish in very large ponds.
So yes, this will prevent the loss of those very valuable native fish.
After 5 minutes with the hindered bass and the strong solution of alarm pheromone, these bonytail are considered trained. Now it's on to the survival trials. The trained bonytail are transferred to a larger pond, where they'll try to survive for 24 hours with 4 very hungry bass. These bass have been starved for several days, and they're very capable of catching and eating their prey.
We put the bonytail in here, we let him sit for 1 hour, and then we add the bass. And that starts a 24-hour clock.
A separate 24-hour survival trial is conducted with 20 untrained bonytail. Then the researchers compare the results. So far, the data show a 75% survival rate for trained fish and a 55% survival rate for untrained bony-tail.
It certainly does seem promising.
Promising, yes, but O'Neill says some challenges remain.
One of the challenges will be expanding the training process to the pond size, to actually scaling it up to a pond setting. And so being able to train 3,000 2-foot-long razorbacks is a little bit different than training 20 3-inch long bony-tail in an 8-foot pond. The other major concern is whether this will actually work in the wild.
If it does work in the wild, give partial credit to a toxin that makes people look younger and helps endangered fish survive.
You got one? Yeah. We might dramatically improve survival of the stocked fish.
The guinea hens of Horseshoe Ranch are greeting the day long before the sun comes up. At the same time, the Wildlife Contracts branch of Arizona Game and Fish is preparing to head out in search of herds of pronghorn that live in the area. They want to place GPS collars on certain pronghorn so they can track their movements in relation to the highway and other obstacles that have cut off their natural range. The issue is called connectivity.
Connectivity is essentially the ability of the animals, of a population of animals, to move throughout its range that it needs to survive in the long term. So that would include areas for food, water, and shelter in both their summer and winter range if they happen to differ. So connectivity is essentially the study of looking at those movements between the resources and within their home range, and looking at the barriers that essentially we've put up that may break those resources apart.
The most difficult part of the operation is safely capturing the pronghorn so the collars can be attached. Crews on the ground radio into the coordination center when they spot a herd in the designated area, in this case, Game Management Unit 21. Then the helicopter is sent in with a crew of 3, including the pilot. The pilot has to have the skill to maneuver the helicopter low and slow over varying terrain until he can single out the one animal they want to capture, and then move the net gunner into position so he can safely fire his net over the animal. The third member of the crew is Mike Priest, and it's his first time on a pronghorn capture.
Well, how it works for my part, as we're chasing the pronghorn, I'm sitting there looking for obstacles that the helicopter might run into, or the pronghorn might run into, and then I hear the net gun go off, and the helicopter will swoop around and hover just above the pronghorn, and I'll unbuckle and jump out and make sure the pronghorn's on the ground, cover its eyes, and hold on to it until Larry gets to me, and then from there he'll put a blindfold on, and we'll start untangling it and put hopples on it, and then we'll do the processing, then put a collar on it, ear tag, take its temperature, and then let it go.
The data the GPS collars will provide is vital to maintain the health of the animals here.
It's important so that we can see how the pronghorn are moving relative to both the highways as far as connectivity goes. Fragmentation is a big concern for pronghorn. They don't cross roads very well. The movement data we're collecting also allows us to make recommendations to the Department of Transportation for when they go to upgrade the interstate, to allow them to make mitigations that will get the pronghorn across the interstate in the appropriate spots. We've done it in a number of locations. We're in varying stages. We've had a lot of success on State Route 260 with elk, and a very, very important success as well on US 93 with bighorn sheep.
There are about 200 pronghorn that live in Unit 21, and when barriers such as Interstate 17 cut them off from their natural range, it not only prevents them from reaching the resources they need to survive, but it also affects the genetic viability of the herd.
It can reduce the subpopulations to a point where there's excessive inbreeding going on, and that can really affect the long-term viability of a population. You can see a lot of detrimental effects popping up from that inbreeding effect, from those inbreeding effects, and you'll eventually lose each of those subpopulations as they become too small for too long.
As Arizona continues to grow, so will the connectivity issues for wildlife. That's why the Wildlife Contracts Branch is working with other entities across the state to assure these animals will be here for future generations.
Yeah, that was a good feeling there, couillon.
While trapping crawfish at Willow Springs Lake, he takes a break to talk about catching fish. This is Bobby Avery's fish story.
I was up at Swirl Lake coming up in northern Arizona off Bush Highway, and I was fishing there, and I had a problem. I was slaying the bass. I was catching them and catch and release, and a couple of my buddies that saw it, and they were fishing out of other boats, and my trolling motor broke down, and so I was down fixing it, and I was on my hands and knees fixing it, and my buddies seemed to come by and wake me out of the boat. So I fell out of the boat, and as I was falling out of the boat, I actually grabbed my rod, trying to hold on to something, and caught a 6-pound bass out of the lake, and that kind of upset them a little bit more for the day. And I got back into the water, or into the boat, and got the fish out of the water, and ruined their day. And we caught about 50 fish that day between me and one of my buddies. So it was a good day at Swirl Lake bass fishing.
Well, that's our show for today. For more information, check out our website at AZGFD.GOV. For all the fine folks at Arizona Game and Fish, I'm Jim Paxon. We'll see you next time.